The photograph had been filed in a folder labeled Administrative Staff, Miscellaneous, Non-Essential, tucked between a record of planetary resource surveys and a report on cafeteria menu compliance. Nobody remembered his name offhand, and fewer still expected him to do anything memorable. The alien queen had not even noticed it when the archives flickered past her viewing console. She had long since developed the skill of glancing at countless records and dismissing them with practiced indifference. Her long ears swiveled slightly, tracing faint pulses of light across their length, the only sign of attention. He moved quietly among the officers in the operations chamber, his boots making the lightest sound on the metal floor, as if the building itself didn't want to acknowledge his existence. Holomaps shimmered across the walls, displaying squadrons, orbital trajectories, and troop distributions in sharp neon lines. The junior officers joked among themselves about the clerk who counts the coffee pods for morale statistics, and he smiled faintly at one comment about how his spreadsheet could supposedly determine planetary happiness better than any general. He did not correct them. They were wrong, of course, but interruption was unnecessary. A sudden alert vibrated through the chamber, shaking even the holographic consoles. The enemy had breached the outlying patrol perimeter. Ships flared in distant orbits, and reports poured in of skirmishes on the planet's surface. Officers who had been waiting for confirmation scrambled to recalculate probabilities, their projections collapsing like towers of sand. The Queen, watching from her command dais, straightened. Her long ears angled forward, luminous bands tracing concentric arcs, a signal she was engaged. "Deploy the first wave," one general barked. "Expect resistance. Recommend full engagement." The human, still a clerk, still in the photograph, still unnoticed except for the occasional smirk, adjusted the tablet in his hands. "Or," he said quietly, "we could redirect the left flank to exploit the enemy's blind sector and avoid unnecessary casualties." The officer nearest him froze. "Excuse me. I said we could try a small maneuver that reduces risk," the human repeated. He tapped the screen. "If Squadron 7 moves here, it forces them to overextend. The recon drones will cover the gaps. Casualties will drop by 17%. A wave of disbelief rippled across the room. One young officer muttered, "He's talking like he's one of the strategists, not a paper pusher." "Precisely," said the human dryly. "I just happen to know what a spreadsheet looks like under pressure." The Queen's ears twitched. She leaned forward slightly, observing the human's calm, almost casual demeanor. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't gesturing wildly. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. And yet his solution was elegant, efficient, and, most importantly, correct. The general cleared his throat. "We don't take orders from clerks." "You're not taking orders," the human said. "I'm offering options." Another officer snorted. "Options in a war zone." "Correct," the human said, "because sometimes flexibility wins where aggression fails." The Queen's lips curved slightly. A trace of amusement flickered across her otherwise impassive face. Her ears pulsed in faint, irregular patterns, the only visible indicator that she was weighing the situation. The human's quiet confidence, the precise timing of his suggestions, and the subtle humor woven into his remarks created an atmosphere that both unnerved and intrigued the military staff. Orders were finally given, slightly amended to accommodate his proposal. The squadron moved. Drones flitted overhead, relaying live tactical updates. Enemy forces hesitated, caught off guard by maneuvers they had not anticipated. Soldiers whispered to each other, marveling at the new pattern of command. One young lieutenant muttered, "He's reading them like a playbook." The human observed, adjusting a holographic interface to anticipate the next enemy response. His comments were brief, understated, and often delivered with a dry quip. "If they attempt that again, they'll probably trip over their own supply lines," he said, and a few officers stifled laughter even as their troops engaged the enemy. The Queen leaned back, her ears glowing faintly. "Fascinating," she murmured. They underestimated him, and yet the battlefield bent subtly to his intuition. The enemy commander, expecting to face chaos and panic, instead confronted an ordered, adaptable opposition. The human's calculations weren't grand gestures. They were precise nudges, small interventions that amplified existing strengths and minimized errors. Every movement seemed minor, but every movement shifted the battle subtly in favor of the defenders. One particularly brash captain attempted a bold strike without coordination. The human intercepted the projected data, issuing a quick adjustment. If you move now, you'll compromise our left flank. Try it 2 seconds later, and it coordinates perfectly. The captain blinked. How? Timing, said the human, and paying attention. From her high vantage, the queen watched as the misjudged strike was corrected almost effortlessly. Her advisors muttered among themselves, calculating probabilities and failing to explain what had just occurred. The human, previously dismissed as insignificant, now subtly controlled the flow of the battle without shouting, without dominating, without a single display of brute force. A drone operator whispered to a fellow technician, "He's not a general, he's something else entirely." The human leaned back slightly in his chair, eyes scanning the holographic feeds. "If they adjust their approach here, we'll have the left flank covered. Otherwise, it's a minor setback." A young officer chuckled nervously. "Minor setback. He says it like he's ordering tea, not saving lives." "Exactly," the human said. "Tea is safer than panic." Even as the first wave of the enemy faltered, a small smile touched the queen's lips. She had anticipated every strategy her advisors could devise. She had prepared for every eventuality, every calculated outcome, but she had not anticipated him. The quiet human in the photograph, previously filed away as insignificant, was rewriting the rules of engagement with a mix of observation, wit, and precision. By the end of the first encounter, the battle lines had shifted decisively, and the queen's ears twitched in an irregular, luminous rhythm, a silent acknowledgement that she had underestimated humanity, and more specifically, the man in the photograph. Her advisors buzzed with nervous excitement and quiet alarm. The human, calm and unflappable, made one last adjustment to the holographic interface and muttered, "That should do it, for now." And for the first time, the queen realized that appearances were not only misleading, they were irrelevant. The overlooked, the unremarkable, the quiet clerk had just demonstrated that true leadership could emerge from the most unlikely place, and that sometimes the smallest presence could shape the destiny of entire fleets. The queen's lips curved into a faint, knowing smile. She leaned back, her long ears pulsing softly with light, and thought, "I did not see this coming." The battle had begun, and so had a new reckoning. The human did not sleep. Not because he lacked rest, but because the battle required thinking in layers. Holomaps rotated around him in 3 dimensions, projecting enemy formations, orbital trajectories, and troop morale in pulses of soft blue and orange light. Officers had taken to whispering around him, unsure whether to marvel or panic. One muttered, "He's cataloging every micro-movement of our allies and enemies like he's tracking butterflies." The human glanced up. "Butterflies are easier to predict," he said lightly, and the officers stifled laughter, the first spark of humor since the skirmish began. The alien queen observed from her command dais, ears flicking in subtle patterns, her luminous bands tracing concentric arcs. She had expected her fleet captains to act with competence, yet here was a single human, unremarkable in every formal report, orchestrating responses that rivaled decades of strategy simulations. One general frowned. "Majesty, he is improvising." The queen's smile was nearly imperceptible. "Improvisation is merely concealed observation," she said. The human tapped a holographic panel. "They're trying a feint on the North Ridge. If we commit too many squads, they'll exploit the southern pass. I recommend minimal engagement and repositioning artillery drones to cover the blind spots." A junior officer muttered, He's treating the battlefield like a chessboard. Chess is slow, the human replied. This is more like synchronized improv without the jazz hands. The queen's ears twitched with amusement. She allowed herself a rare moment of levity. He was not only competent, he had a sense of humor, a trait she had long considered irrelevant in warfare. And yet, here it was, subtly easing the tension of her otherwise rigid counsel. As the battle escalated, the human directed squads using drones and portable holoprojectors. He didn't issue grandiose commands or demand deference. Instead, he nudged movements, predicted enemy reactions, and corrected minor mistakes before they could become catastrophic. One overeager officer attempted to deploy a heavy mech in the wrong quadrant. The human calmly adjusted the targeting feed, muttering, "Unless your mech enjoys a scenic detour, try this instead." The officer paused, glanced at him, and executed the maneuver correctly, muttering, How does he know?" The queen noted every detail, her ears flaring softly. She had encountered humans before, loud, brash, occasionally brilliant, but none who could manipulate chaos with such subtlety. The human's interventions were quiet, almost invisible, yet profoundly effective. He was the eye of the storm, calm where others panicked, and strategic where others acted on reflex. One holographic readout indicated the enemy attempting a coordinated orbital strike. Fleet captains shouted over one another. The human leaned forward, tapping the interface. "They're relying on timing sequences that are predictable. If we rotate the shield drones by 32 degrees and trigger counterflare pulses, the strike will fizzle harmlessly." A lieutenant whispered to his neighbor, "He's playing with them like a child with sparklers." "Child with sparklers," the human said without looking up. "I prefer controlled fireworks." Even in the heat of combat, humor slipped between calculations and decisions. Soldiers adjusted to his tone, laughing quietly at his quips, and yet following instructions with precise discipline. The human's calm, measured approach began to ripple through the ranks, stabilizing units that had faltered under the chaos of sudden engagement. The enemy commander, a notoriously aggressive tactician, attempted a feigned retreat to draw the defenders into a trap. Sensors picked up the maneuver, but the human anticipated the deception. "They want us to commit to the ridge," he said, "but the path is mined and covered with decoys. Keep 2 squads in reserve and rotate surveillance drones overhead. Let them exhaust their feint." The queen watched this in near silence. Her long ears glowed faintly, bands of light tracing a slow, rhythmic pattern. Every prediction she had made about the enemy's behavior had been accurate, except this one. The human's interventions, subtle and precise, forced a deviation she had not calculated. She felt a rare thrill, surprise, and the kind of admiration she had rarely granted. "Majesty," one general said, his voice tight. "He's anticipating the enemy's psychological patterns, not just their formations." The queen inclined her head slightly. "Indeed." By midday, the battle had shifted. Casualties were lower than predicted, and units that would have panicked were reorganized under his quiet guidance. He moved among officers with minimal presence, issuing corrections like a conductor fine-tuning an orchestra. Occasionally, he made a joke about misplaced drones or clumsy mech pilots, and laughter, small but genuine, rippled across the operations floor. A sudden alert signaled an incoming enemy squad attempting to flank the southern artillery. The human did not panic. "If they push now, they'll expose themselves to the orbital railguns," he said. "Rotate targeting by 15 degrees and simulate a retreat pattern, like a gentle invitation. They'll walk right into it." It worked. Enemy units stumbled into predictable traps and friendly forces responded with fluid efficiency. The council gasped. Fleet captains recalculated in real time, muttering incredulously. Finally, the human leaned back and said, "That should stabilize the front, for now." The queen's ears twitched, luminous bands rippling. She allowed herself a faint, amused smile. "For now," she repeated softly. "Indeed." Her advisors whispered among themselves, astonished and unsettled. One muttered, "The clerk, the human in the photograph, he's commanding the battle." "Yes," she said quietly, "and doing it better than most of us could imagine." The human, oblivious to the significance, adjusted a hollow panel, muttering to himself about logistics, coffee rations, and the timing of orbital recon drones. His focus, humor, and calm presence had not only guided the forces but had reshaped how everyone, including the alien queen, would perceive leadership, strategy, and the hidden power of the overlooked. The battle was far from over, but the human had already proven that appearances were deceptive, that brilliance could emerge in quiet forms, and that sometimes the smallest presence on the floor could redirect the course of entire fleets. The queen leaned back, her ears tracing a slow, deliberate rhythm. "I did not expect this," she murmured, and for the first time in decades, she realized that predicting the future might never be entirely possible, especially when humans were involved. The battle had settled into an uneasy rhythm, the clatter of distant explosions and the hum of hovering drones forming a constant background to the human's quiet orchestration. He moved among the command consoles like a shadow, observing, adjusting, and occasionally smiling at a minor misstep that might have been catastrophic if handled incorrectly. A junior officer had accidentally misaligned a hollow projection, and the human quipped, "Ah, yes, the infamous diagonal glitch, an ancient tactic used by procrastinating strategists everywhere." The officer blinked, unsure whether to be offended or amused, and the room erupted in a suppressed chuckle. Even in the midst of war, his humor was a stabilizing force, smoothing tensions while keeping focus razor-sharp. The alien queen watched from her elevated observation platform, ears twitching in slow arcs as she followed every data stream. She had never encountered such subtle command. It was neither flamboyant nor coercive. It was quiet influence, precise, and terrifyingly effective. She motioned for a holographic feed, watching the human's adjustments ripple across the battlefield like a conductor guiding an orchestra of chaos. "Notice," she said to a nearby general, "how he does not yell, he does not gesture wildly, and yet the troops respond as if he has been issuing orders for decades." The general nodded stiffly. "It is unsettling." "Unsettling is the understatement of the century," the human murmured from across the room, eyes focused on a set of orbital projection panels. "If I were really trying to unsettle them, I'd have launched the decoy drones through the central corridor. That tends to cause panic." A junior officer gasped in surprise. "He just joked while plotting orbital decoys." "Yes," the human said, "humor helps with compliance. Ask any planetary administrator." The queen allowed herself a faint smile. Her advisors exchanged glances. Some whispered nervously, others audibly sighed in relief that at least someone had levity under fire. One of her counselors muttered, "This is unprecedented." A human leading. Meanwhile, the enemy attempted a coordinated orbital strike. Sensor arrays picked up the formation of their assault craft, calculating trajectories to anticipate the defenders' weaknesses. The human tilted his head, watching the holographic paths converge. "They are banking on overconfidence. Standard trick, really. Predictable if you've ever played chess with someone who thinks knights are invisible." A nearby lieutenant stifled a laugh. "You mean he's reading their psychology, not just their movements?" "Precisely," the human replied. "Sometimes the mind is the weakest link." He tapped the interface again, rerouting orbital drones to create a dynamic shield matrix, while subtle holographic projections simulated phantom reinforcements. The enemy, fooled by the patterns, adjusted poorly, leaving openings that his forces exploited with minimal risk. The junior officers muttered in awe, realizing that efficiency and subtlety could outperform sheer firepower. The queen's ears twitched, light pulsing along their length. She had predicted every possible strategy her generals had devised, but this human, quiet, unremarkable in every official record, was rewriting assumptions in real time. She observed him with a mixture of amusement and professional intrigue. "I may have underestimated humanity," she murmured. "Majesty," one officer asked. She waved a hand. "This is a human anomaly. Witness it. Learn it. Do not interfere." The human glanced at a live feed of the surface conflict. A squad of mech units was about to collide with an improvised barrier the enemy had deployed. He leaned slightly forward, murmuring, "Ah, the classic misjudged barricade. Easy fix." A subtle adjustment to a drone signal, a minor rotation of the hollow projection, and the units avoided the hazard entirely. A small cheer echoed across the observation floor. The Queen's ears twitched, light brightening ever so slightly. "Remarkable," the general muttered. "He's correcting battlefield errors before they happen." The human shrugged almost apologetically. Experience, observation, slightly irrational optimism. The Queen allowed herself a quiet laugh, a rare sound she reserved for extraordinary circumstances. "I did not expect to enjoy this human," she said, though her tone carried neither derision nor pity. Her advisors scribbled frantic notes, attempting to quantify what could not be calculated. Intuition applied at scale, leadership manifest in subtle nudges rather than declarations. As the conflict progressed, a more dangerous development emerged. Enemy reinforcements were arriving faster than predicted, and the potential for a bottleneck near the planetary surface threatened a full-scale collapse. The human observed, then tapped a sequence into the holographic interface. "We'll rotate the reserve squads in a staggered pattern, using orbital drones to simulate phantom units. They'll hesitate long enough for the main force to stabilize. It's a gamble, but not a reckless one." An officer whispered, "Did he just gamble during battle?" "Yes." The Queen's ears twitched in amusement and intrigue. "Indeed," she murmured. "And I have learned, perhaps for the first time, that humans are far more unpredictable and far more capable than anyone gives them credit for." The human, oblivious to the scope of his impact, tapped the final adjustments on the holographic panels. "That should hold the line. For now," he said, and the room, tense moments ago, erupted quietly in restrained laughter. Humor, precision, and unexpected brilliance had won the day, and the alien Queen could not hide her astonished admiration. The human had barely paused before the next challenge arrived. Reports streamed in at a dizzying pace. Enemy reinforcements had arrived, faster and more organized than predicted, and orbital scans indicated a cluster of unknown units moving through a debris field like ghosts in a fog. Officers around him began muttering calculations, their voices tight with tension, but he simply tilted his head and smiled faintly. "They're improvising," he said. "Good. That makes them predictable in all the wrong ways." A junior officer blinked. "Predictable? How can they be predictable if they're improvising?" The human leaned over the holographic panel, rotating the battlefield projection with a subtle flick of his hand. "Improvisation has patterns if you know what to look for. Think of it as jazz. Chaotic, yes, but only within a set of rules." The Queen watched from her elevated platform, ears tracing slow, luminous arcs, light rippling along their length as she studied him. She had been prepared for bold moves, for aggressive assaults or reckless heroics, but not this. The human was orchestrating the battle like a symphony conductor who preferred subtle gestures over grand flourishes. She allowed herself a brief smile, one that went unnoticed except by her closest advisors. "Deploy the counter-drones here," he said, shifting a series of holographic markers, "and rotate the surveillance array by 12 degrees to simulate phantom reinforcements. They'll overcommit to the flank and expose the center." A lieutenant leaned closer, whispering to his neighbor, "He's manipulating them with holograms." "More like with logic," the human replied without looking up. "And timing is underrated." The enemy commander, observing through remote feeds, made a sudden, audacious maneuver. A rapid orbital strike aimed at the supply hub. Alerts flashed, and officers shouted frantic corrections, but the human remained calm. He swiped the panel, launching a series of counterflares and orbital shields that shifted in response to each projected vector. If they fire now, they'll hit decoys. If they fire later, they'll hit decoys. Basically, they hit decoys either way. It's elegant in a tragic sort of way. An officer laughed quietly despite the situation. Elegant tragedy. I've never heard that phrasing before. Most people prefer to survive elegance, the human said, tapping a tiny sequence to adjust drone position slightly. Works better in practice. The Queen's ears twitched as she studied him. Her centuries of experience with unpredictable humans had not prepared her for this. He was unremarkable in every formal sense, yet every action he took reverberated through the battlefield with precision and foresight. She noted the subtle humor he wove into his instructions, how it soothed stressed officers while commanding respect, a combination she had assumed impossible. "Majesty," one general said, glancing nervously at her, "he is controlling the battle without authority. It is unprecedented." The Queen allowed a slow nod. "Yes, and fascinating." The human shifted focus to the ground troops, redirecting small squads with simple gestures through his console. Squad A, approach via the left ridge but maintain low visibility. They're expecting loud movements, so blend in with terrain shadows. Squad B, hold position until the orbital decoy triggers. "Yes, that one, the one that looks like a glitch. Perfect." A corporal whispered, "He's joking with the units mid-combat." "Humor is a stress diffuser," the human said, almost absently. "Also, morale matters more than firepower sometimes. Soldiers aren't robots, mostly." By midday, a gap had formed in the enemy formation, precisely where the human predicted. A single feigned retreat by his controlled squad drew the enemy forward, exposing their center to a coordinated strike from orbital artillery and mech units. The maneuver was delicate, requiring split-second timing, but his calm instructions and subtle humor kept everyone synchronized. The Queen's ears pulsed brightly, catching every movement. She had not anticipated that the human could blend observation, humor, and improvisation into an effective strategy that outmaneuvered centuries of calculated assumptions. Even her advisors, brilliant in their own right, were scrambling to recalibrate their understanding of human capability. "Ah," the human said, observing the holographic feed. "They're panicking just enough to misstep, but not enough to notice it." "Delightful." The junior officer nearby laughed quietly, shaking his head. "Delightful, while we're trying not to die." "Exactly," the human replied. "Timing and comedy, the keys to victory in my humble experience." Enemy reinforcements attempted to flank the southern artillery, but the human had anticipated this. He reallocated reserve units with a calm precision, rotating drones to create a mirrored threat, causing the enemy to hesitate. "They'll freeze for approximately 3-2 seconds," he said, "and that's all the time we need." It worked. Units hesitated and the friendly forces filled the gap, preventing a collapse. Officers exchanged incredulous looks. One muttered, "He's controlling their perception now." "Yes," the human said. "Perception is half the battle. The other half is making them think they have the initiative." By late afternoon, the battlefield was largely stabilized. Enemy forces were confused and cautious, reacting to the human's subtle nudges rather than executing coherent strategy. Casualties were lower than projected, and soldiers moved with renewed confidence, often glancing at the quiet human with a mix of awe and disbelief. The Queen, alone on her observation deck, allowed herself a small laugh. Her ears shimmered, bands of light shifting in rhythm with her amusement. "So," she murmured, "humans can surprise even me." Her advisors, watching the human's quiet control unfold, scribbled frantic notes, trying to quantify intuition, humor, and improvisation in the middle of battle. They could not. It defied all formal models. The human glanced briefly at the Queen's observation platform, nodding ever so slightly, as if acknowledging the audience. "Don't worry," he said quietly, though she could not hear him. I've got this for now. And in that moment, the queen understood that the human's power was not in brute force or flashy maneuvers. It was in observation, patience, subtle humor, and the uncanny ability to turn chaos into opportunity. The battlefield had been reshaped not by overwhelming might, but by quiet intellect and a touch of wit. And she, the alien queen, could only watch, fascinated and amused, as the once overlooked human continued to guide events with unassuming brilliance. The next phase of the battle loomed, but for now, even the enemy was dancing to a rhythm they did not understand, and the human, with his quiet confidence and unexpected humor, led the way. The battlefield had quieted, the last of the enemy's orbital vessels slipping into retreat, their formations fractured, their strategies undone by careful observation and subtle misdirection. The human stood at his console, adjusting the final feed of surveillance drones and orbital scanners. The glow from the holographic maps reflected faintly on his calm face, the lines of concentration softened by a trace of humor as he muttered to himself. And that's why overconfidence is a terrible strategy, unless you enjoy free orbital fireworks. Nearby, officers chuckled quietly, their tension easing after days of chaos. A corporal leaned over, whispering, "I've never seen anyone command a battlefield while making jokes about explosions." The human glanced up dryly. "It helps with morale. Well, that and caffeine." He sipped a lukewarm cup from a thermally stabilized mug, mostly caffeine. The alien queen descended from her observation deck, her long ears tracing arcs of glowing light as she walked. The battlefield had been secured not through overwhelming force, but through precision, timing, and the unexpected creativity of one quiet human. Advisors shuffled nervously behind her, aware of the precedent that had been set. "You've done well," the queen said, her tone neutral, yet her ears pulsed with faint amusement. "Far better than anyone expected." The human shrugged. "I just did what made sense." The queen raised an eyebrow. Sense is sometimes the rarest form of courage. She allowed herself a small smile, one that was both approval and acknowledgement. "You have shown us that leadership need not be loud, brash, or ostentatious. Quiet observation, subtle nudges, and a little humor can shape outcomes just as decisively as fleets of warships." The human tilted his head, considering. "I suppose that makes sense. I just wanted to make sure people didn't die unnecessarily." The queen nodded slowly. "And in doing so, you have redefined our understanding of humanity, of leadership, and of power itself." Her luminous ears swiveled, bands pulsing softly with approval. "Even I underestimated the value of subtlety. Even I underestimated you." A junior officer piped up, "Sir, the troops, they want to know how we won without massive casualties." "How do we explain?" The human waved a hand. "Tell them we won because we paid attention, stayed calm, and sometimes laughed at our own mistakes." The queen's eyes flicked to him. "You joke, yet you speak truth. Perhaps humor is a tool we have overlooked." He smirked faintly. "It's better than panic, usually." Advisors whispered among themselves, scribbling notes furiously. The human's methods, quiet influence, observation, minimal command, humor as a weapon, and predictive intuition, had rewritten their manuals, challenged centuries of doctrine, and unsettled the way the empire calculated strategy. The human stepped away from the console, stretching for the first time since the conflict began. "Well, that's the immediate crisis handled. Now someone needs to explain to the logistics team why half the orbital supply drones think they're party decorations." A chuckle ran through the room. The queen allowed herself a faint laugh, her ears flicking with rhythm as if she found the remark surprisingly endearing. "You have charm in addition to strategy," she observed. "I like to keep it balanced," he replied. "Chaos and charm in equal measure." The queen regarded him quietly. "You have changed, haven't you? Not in form, but in presence. You have learned to wield patience as power, wit as influence, and observation as command. And yet, you remain unassuming." He looked down at his hands. I suppose I just finally realized that being quiet doesn't mean being powerless. Indeed, the Queen said, a hint of warmth in her voice. And that is a lesson not only for you but for all of us. The human glanced toward the horizon, where the damaged enemy fleet limped toward retreat, and then at the reorganized friendly forces, moving efficiently and confidently. I didn't do this alone, he said. Everyone played a part. I just nudged things in the right direction. The Queen's ears twitched, glowing slightly brighter. Leadership often manifests where it is least expected. You have reminded us that appearances are deceptive, that courage is quiet, and that influence need not be ostentatious to be absolute. A signal chimed. Incoming communication from the surviving enemy commanders. The human activated the feed. "Hello," he said casually, "we're going to need better timing next time, and maybe fewer decoy drones." The Queen raised an eyebrow, amused at his audacity. He had won not by dominance, but by intelligence, wit, and composure, an approach she found both effective and oddly entertaining. As the human prepared to return to his nominal post, the one no one ever expected to shape the course of empires, he paused. He had changed. The quiet observer in the photograph had grown into someone who recognized that influence could be exercised without spectacle, that humor and patience were as strategic as firepower, and that even the overlooked could command attention, respect, and